Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to Painting a Pandemic Portrait. My name is Michelle MacKinnon. I'm going to be here painting with you today. Today we are painting Kim Greeley, who is a painter and printmaker out in St. John's. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started. You can feel free, if you're painting along today, to ask any questions, or you can just ask any questions in general about pandemic portraits, about my practice, about me, about anything really. So I'm just gonna get started. This will be somewhat instructional and also, I guess, instructional, informative, and question answering as we go. I'm gonna start with my, this is just where we picked up from yesterday, by the way, or last week, I should say. Haven't done anything to it since. I'm going to use my kneadable eraser because I want to pick up a lot of this graphite before we actually go in. So I'm just stamping it. Reason being is I don't want the graphite to mix in with all of the nice vivid colors that I'm going to be using. So if you just stamp it away a bit first, that's helpful. There, so just using it to pick it up. Nothing too intense. And then areas around the hair, I like to get rid of it a little more. Same with the clothing, just so it's really gone when I go in there and there's nothing after, because it's more difficult, obviously, to erase after your watercolor's gone. Today, I'm going to be using this number 0 brush, as well as a number 2, or 4, I think, actually. This is in between. This is a 3. I'm going to be using a 0 and a 3 brush. And I have my Winsor & Newton watercolor palette. I love this one, super highly pigmented, lots of colors. And as you can tell, I'm a very messy palette keeper. I kind of keep everything from the last one because I find that way I can kind of go back in and just start using everything. So I guess we'll get started. I'm going to start with the eyes. That's where I tend to start every time. So I'm just going to start with kind of like a dark greeny gray color. Maybe we'll pull from this one. Bring it in here. So I like to start in with just kind of getting the iris in there. And there's not a lot of highlights in this image of Kim that we're painting. So because of that, I don't need to worry about protecting those areas of white so much, but I know that I'm going to want to go in and force in a couple little highlights just to kind of keep it consistent with the rest of them. So I'm not worrying about that too much with the watercolor at the moment. I'm going to worry about it a little bit more later with a little bit of gouache. If you don't have gouache, you can use white watercolor. That's fine. It just probably won't be as vivid. Now I'm going to go around with some dark areas on the eye here, kind of like around the iris. I work on both eyes at the same time. I like to keep my colors consistent between the two of them. So going between the two of them makes it so I always have that same color again. Pay attention to areas of light and shadow in the eyes too, because obviously the eyes are hooded, and we want to make sure that it does have that nice deep shadow on the top. Like I said, you can feel free to ask any questions. I'm just kind of sitting here making up content as I go, so any of your burning painting questions, this is a good time to get them answered. Next, I'm mixing up kind of like a, get a little bit of that green out. I'm mixing kind of like a pinky brown color for the whites of the eyes. Obviously, the whites of the eyes aren't going to be super white. You don't want them to be. They end up being far too bright. So I've kind of got this nice pinky brown that I'm going to add in here in a couple different places. It's going to end up traveling into that kind of pink carnuncula in the eye anyway, so I'll just start kind of applying it in there. And I'm going to take a little bit of water off my brush so I can kind of blend it in a bit. So just going in with a bit more shadow. In this image that we have of Kim, it's a very deep shadow, and I'll reiterate what I said last time that we went live when we were doing the drawing, in that I don't ask for any edited pictures of anybody. I just kind of ask for photos of them right as they are at the time. So sometimes those images are a little dark, but I just kind of try and roll with it. Just logged in. Is this free? What is the topic? Ooh, yes. Hi, Joyce. Yes, this is free. We are doing a watercolor pandemic portrait. My name is MacKinnon, and I'm doing pandemic portraits of artists in Newfoundland. So I'm just showing kind of my process on how I go about painting them. And it's free for asking questions and asking me to talk about things. I can do all those. It's probably better for people to ask me about talking about things, or I'm just going to ramble for a while. Okay, so now I'm painting the pupil. Oops, anatomy, Michelle. I'm just painting that in nice and dark. The pupil is going to be the darkest part on your painting, most likely. So it's good to just get that in dark right from the beginning. I know it's a little small on here. Hopefully it's a bit bigger on your screen. The one I'm looking at it's very, very tiny. These pandemic portraits are very small in general, though. These are on 6x9 sheets of Canson XL watercolor paper. Very itty bitty. I find one thing that happens a lot with them too is I tend to lean towards purples a lot. I really enjoy them, and because of that, I find that the portraits end up getting a little tired looking. But I kind of decided just to lean into that for these because they're pandemic portraits. Everyone looks exhausted anyway, right? No, I do. So I'm just getting those shadows really nice and deep into the eyes because you can see it is rather dark in that image if you have the image to work along with. If not, you'll just have to take my word for it. And watercolors I find tend to dry a little bit lighter than when you first apply them, so sometimes it's helpful to go back in. It's nice and dark. Okay, so from this point, I like to let the eyes really dry a bit. So I like to leave them for a second and then go to the forehead. That's kind of the next natural place that I go to. So I have kind of like a yellowy, pinky kind of tone that I'm going to start working with, kind of already up here from the last time. Yellow ochre, and then I'm using this kind of like crimson color over here. And I'm just going to start with the areas that are close. Ooh, not quite enough on there. I'm just going to start to the areas close to the hairline. And this is going to be kind of an all-over tone. There's a lot of layering colors that happens in the pandemic portraits. So I like to let things be light at first and add them in from there. And I even just like to take from those kind of already dark spots on my palette and start bringing them in. very satisfying to add in those shadows. And then this area here, I'm going to add in a bit more shadow in here. I have it blocked out for hair right now, but I feel like there's going to be little hairs that come down, and that's going to be just like a shadowed area. Could you explain the pandemic portrait, please? Of course I can. That's a great question. Thank you. I just take for granted that people on here might already know what that is. So the pandemic portrait series is a series that I kind of, that I started without really any intention in the beginning. So I started them in the beginning of the pandemic. I just found that my practice was really slow at that time, as I find a lot of people's were, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to make. I mean, it was kind of a time when all of us were in strange, precarious places, and I just didn't, I didn't have access to my supplies that I would normally have for my large drawings that I was working on in my studio. They were locked away. So I found myself knitting a lot at home, but I was finally getting to the point where I was like, okay, I wanna start making things again. So I woke up one morning and I kind of thought, like I looked at my partner and I was like, you know, I wanna paint a picture today. And it felt like such like a childlike thing to say, like just, I wanna paint a picture. But it was the first time that I felt kind of motivated to do something. So I knew that my watercolors were at home. So I decided to whip those out and I did a self-portrait. It turned out not great, but the fact was that I finally kind of began and finished something within a time period, and I was quite pleased with just the fact that I did that. So the next day, I decided I wanted to paint another one, and I painted it of my partner, who is also an artist, Andrew Testa, and that one, again, like not my favorite, went okay. But again, I decided that I just wanted to keep working on it. So then I did another one of a friend who is also an artist, and then I just started asking other arts-related folks in Newfoundland and Labrador if I could paint their portrait during this pandemic. Another kind of aspect of it is that they all have titles, and I should look up what Kim's is because I'm not 100% off the top of my head sure what it is, but they all have titles pertaining to significant moments for the sitter in the pandemic. So for example, when I did mine, it was back in April, and I titled it on April whatever it was, or no, May. Maybe it was May. Anyway, my flat iron broke, and that was like a significant moment for me. It was I have very wild, unruly hair without my flat iron, and for me it was kind of just silly but important. So and then like my partner started carving spoons, so his was on whatever day I started carving spoons. And then it kind of turned into me asking people about moments of significance for them during the pandemic. It didn't have to be something that was positive or negative. I didn't have to understand the context for it, just kind of anything that they did during the pandemic that stood out as significant for them. And I started getting such a wide variety of answers. There were things like people talking about they rearranged their tote bags. There were people who had their first child, all sorts of kind of all over the map things. And I love that kind of highlighting the significance of things that we normally would find rather mundane. So I started doing that, and I just kept going, and right now I'm currently at, I think, 46 pandemic portraits, and they actually just came down at the Rooms in St. John's. They were part of their Making Art in a Global Pandemic series, and yeah, so that's the gist of the pandemic portraits. They've all been little watercolors and all featuring artists and arts-related folk within Newfoundland and Labrador. Do you have any other questions about it, Joyce? Anything else I can answer about it for you? So right now I've just been building up on colors. for the shadow here. And I haven't added in the eyebrow yet. I'm just kind of leaving it for now to get the skin built up around it. Okay, so I think I'm gonna take this opportunity now to let this dry, and I'm going to hop into the eyes. So I like to start with kind of figuring out right around the eyes and moving out from there. So I'm going to start by adding in that little crease around the eyes. Or I guess the hood of the eye. Am I in St. John's? No, I'm not. I am in Corner Brook, and we're currently at the Rotary Arts Center right now, which was nice to be able to do a workshop in a place. I was just in St. John's on the weekend for the artist spotlight at the rooms, which was great, but a very fast turnaround. It was an overnight trip. I also teach at Grenfell in drawing and painting, so I had a class before and I had some demos to work on afterwards, so quick back and forth. Too fast of a drive. Oh, I got a little hair. There, so we got that nice kind of crease in here. How do I mix skin tones? What colors? That's a great question, Kendall. So I find with these pandemic portraits, I'm really less concerned about mixing skin tones in any sort of formal manner. I'm more concerned about looking at the values that I see on the face and the hues that I see on the face, and comparing those, I guess. So like within this forehead, so far, all I've really been using is a mix of yellow ochre, this crimson, and a little bit of this burnt umber here. And that's about all I've been using so far up here. We'll start to add in some other colors later. But around the eyes so far, I've used a really deep purple for the crease, and I've used a kind of yellow ochre with the burnt umber for around the eyes. So it really changes everywhere depending on the color temperature that I'm looking at. I'm not looking for them to necessarily be accurate, I guess, to what's going on if I was to look at the person in person, but more so accurate to kind of the colors in the photos, and for having that kind of dark and tired feeling that I think the pandemic inspires all of us to feel. So it's kind of about just looking at those colors, and like, for example, right now I'm going to mix a color for just like underneath the eyebrow. So I want to kind of start with this more yellowy color, which I took out of here. And I just want to put a layer of that down, which is going to mostly get covered up, but I know that I want that brightness to show through, so I'm putting it in right now. And then same with, like, I'm going to come over here into this kind of more orangey yellow color, and I'm going to place that on the hood of the eye here. Do I teach art classes? That's another good question. Yes and no, I think, is the answer. So I teach in drawing and painting at Grenfell. So I do, in a sense, teach art classes in that way. Do I teach independent art classes? Not really. I sometimes teach workshops through the Rotary Arts Center, and this being one of them. Not that this is necessarily like a teaching, but more of a asking questions and workshopping. And I mean, last year we did a kind of intro to watercolor, like a drawing to watercolor situation, and those went over well. So I'm thinking we'll hopefully maybe do something like that in the future. I'm saying this with Whitney sitting across the room listening. But in short, like I don't teach art classes independently anywhere, or I haven't before. I also like to kind of come back to your question, Kendall, about mixing colors for skin tones. I really like run the gambit, as you can tell on my palette. It's always a mess, which is very opposite to how I live my life in every other way. Normally I love things super tidy and super clean all the time, but when it comes to a palette, for some reason, especially watercolors, which can be reactivated the entire time that you're using them, I love keeping it nice and messy. Because I like all those previous colors to already be there so I can just hop back into them. Oh, thank you, Georgia. That's so kind. Georgia said that I got her addicted to watercolors. Georgia is a student in one of my classes that I'm teaching. There. So I'm just kind of moving around the inside of the glasses right now. I like kind of breaking it down into these sections and spots. It makes it a little bit easier to see all the colors and see what you need from them. There, I've always been interested in watercolors. I love watercolors. And it's funny because I think that like my relationship to watercolors has really like come in and out through my life. I didn't really use them a lot when I was younger. I feel like I was in a program where I was just told to, you know, like watercolors are for sketching, like move up to acrylics and oils, and like that's what you should be using. But I like acrylics, don't get me wrong, and I like oils, but there's something about watercolor that I just absolutely adore. I remember the first time seeing like Mary Pratt's work and just being blown away by her use of watercolor and how she could just get all that depth and warmth out of it. So as soon as I saw that, I'm like, okay, well, like someone's doing it right. I can do this. I can work on this. Not to say that I'm anywhere near what Mary Pratt does. Oh my goodness. But that was just kind of like a moment for me where I realized like I can achieve what I want to achieve with this. Now it's just a matter of practicing with it. But I do find that with watercolors, quality does make a gigantic difference. And I've realized this from trying to use more inexpensive watercolors, which are fine and dandy for learning, but not wonderful in the long run if you're trying to achieve particular outcomes, I find anyway. The ones that are a little higher quality, they have much higher pigmentation to them. So you don't need as much to do more. Joyce, you asked if I was from St. John's. Are you located in St. John's? Is that why you were asking? I also tend to really get in with the purples in the shadows under the eyes, and that's why they tend to get so tired and heavy looking. But again, I like it, so I just keep up with it. Kendall, I think you made me appreciate watercolor. Before second year painting, I was not a fan. Pencils will always be my favorite. Oh, well, Kendall, you're preaching to the choir there because you know how much I love pencils. I adore working in pencils, but for these, it's funny too, because I actually did a portrait first in pencil for the pandemic portraits. And I just didn't think it was effective, which felt really weird for me because normally I'm a huge fan of anything pencil related. But I completed it and I looked at it and I was like, no, that's not quite right. Something just wasn't sitting right. I think it felt too quick and sketchy. Oh, you were in St. John's 2 weeks ago. Just missed each other. At that point, I was in Port Saunders giving a acrylic workshop up there. There. Okay, before I start putting on things like eyelashes and eyebrows and things on this side, I'm gonna go over and work on the other side now. There is a beautiful kind of like, if you have the photo, like a beautiful pinky purple hue underneath the eye on this side. So I just really wanna highlight that color, even though kind of like the yellow on the other side, a lot of it's going to disappear. I just wanna really bring that in. It's funny, I don't know how many people have ever tried really painting where you're not like on top of what you're doing, or maybe that is how you paint, but I'm used to being right on top of what I'm working on. So this is a very different feeling for me. I'm sitting off to the side so everyone can actually see what I'm doing. And it's definitely feels funny. So I teach acrylic. Again, I don't teach really any just classes. That was actually through the Office of Engagement at Grenfell, where we go to rural communities sometimes and give workshops there. So that was actually my first time participating in that program, and it was wonderful to get to go up and to meet some new people. It was a little strange with it being COVID times and traveling and giving a workshop in person at that time. But I think it went very well overall. I kind of like, I do workshops, I guess, in little blips. I do host them sometimes, and I share when I am hosting them. It's just not too often that I do them. But yeah, that one was an acrylic. What we did in that one, actually, we consulted with the community in Port Saunders and asked what type of workshop that they were looking for specifically. And a lot of them said that they wanted to learn acrylics, but specifically they wanted to learn a landscape. So we actually treated it sort of like that idea of a paint night a little bit, but it was a paint night where at the same time we were learning the basics of acrylics along with it. So we were very, very fortunate, and Tom Cochran let us use one of his photos to work from. It was a picture that he took, where was it? At the, oh jeepers, what's that spot called? In Gross Morin, where the big hike is. Gross Morin Mountain? I'm not sure. Anywho, it was that area. I'm just having my brain's not remembering it right now. Anyway, but we did that one, and so they learned how to paint with acrylics through painting a landscape, and they got to leave with a landscape. So it was a 2-day workshop where they did that. I think it was fun. I hope so. I really added in a lot of yellow here. There's not so much of that yellow in the actual photo, but sometimes I just like, we're painting, right? Like nothing has to be perfect. So I just like to push other colors sometimes a little bit brighter, especially since I use so much purple in my paintings. That little bit of yellow I find just pops it out. Western Brook, that is exactly what it's called. I was so stuck on Gross Morin that I completely forgot. Western Brook, that hiking trail. It was an image from in there. And it was great because everyone was familiar with it when we were painting it. So they got to paint a place that they were familiar with. There. dark in here. Tom's photos are awesome. Tom is just a lovely human being. Big fan. Making sure that all these deep shadows are in here, because there's a lot of them around the eyes, and if it's feeling dark right now, that's because it's going to. We don't have all the other contrast from the other areas of the painting in yet to tone it down, like the glasses, for example. The glasses I won't do until I have the skin all the way around rendered. I don't want to have to go back in and revisit the glasses or the skin once the glasses are on. So I just get everything the way I want it beforehand so that we're just free to add on the glasses after. That was a great session of questions where I didn't have to think myself for a bit. If anyone has any other questions, you can totally feel free to ask them in here. Okay, I think I'm gonna add on the eyelashes at this point. I'm obviously not going to paint on every eyelash one by one because that would be masochistic. I don't have a brush small enough for that. So I'm going to use, I'm using my Payne's Gray and my Burnt Umber here and mixing them together to create a nice deep color. Because I don't use black. And my few students who are on here know how much I hate it. Is there a reason why you leave the background blank? Good question. I don't know that the background is, wait. Sorry, I just don't want to talk while I'm doing this thin little black line that I can't erase. Uno momento. I don't know that the background is even that important in these. So I find like the background, because I thought about it, I can't figure out any context that it would give it that is important. So I just decided that the background wasn't an important part of these pandemic portraits, essentially. I have this tendency, I think, within my practice to leave backgrounds white. When I was working in portraits, I did. When I do my knitted pieces, I do. Like my drawn knitted pieces. I just kind of always have. And I just kind of like that floatiness. A lot of my practice, I work with themes of memory, and I just think that it speaks a little bit more to it, not giving it that kind of context of a background. So I'm just going and doing these tiny little shadows that exist underneath the eyes. This one I can tell is already getting really dark. I've got a very different lighting situation that I typically have. Normally I sit in my dining room and have the natural light on, but this is a relatively dark area with a bright light on top of it. So this one's going to look like, if you're familiar with any of my other pandemic portraits, it's gonna look a lot like the one that I did of Darcy Wilson. Where it has a lot of purple and it's very dark. But also I found that the image that Darcy gave me was relatively dark in the first place. Like it wasn't from as bright of a room as the others have been. So I just decided to kind of lean into it a little bit and play with that darkness more. which seems to be what's happening a bit with Kim's as well. I like to be kind of fun and playful with them. That's the other thing. When I started these, I never wanted them to add pressure to my day, essentially. They were born of being stressed out, and I didn't want them to further add to that. So really, I've kind of taken on and adapted this attitude of like, oh, that's how it turned out? All right, that's cool. Keep going with it. Which is very freeing and very backwards, again, to how I work, because I'm usually such a very careful and controlled person when it comes to my drawings. So even that act of letting go was very strange. What brand of watercolors and watercolor paper do you like most? Great question. Hello, Abby. So I adore my Winsor & Newton Cotman set of watercolors. I just can't say enough good things about them. Winsor & Newton Cotman is not, well, actually, this isn't even the Cotman set, is it? Oh, wait. No, it's not. This is like the real deal Winsor & Newtons. They are fancy. I wouldn't typically have been able to even afford this palette of paints, but when I was working for Algoma University, they have professional development funds available for their sessional instructors that you just use up, which is really, really cool. And you can use them for, you know, like anything to do with your practice, like books or supplies and whatnot. So anyway, I splurged and got this nice big watercolor set. And I thank myself all the time for it because it is so beautiful. The colors are so rich. The pigments are just, oh, beautiful. But Winsor & Newton Cotman, what I was going to say, is also an excellent line. They aren't as highly pigmented, but for if you're just learning or if you're not too into watercolors yet, they are fantastic for learning because you're going to get a sense of what it's going to be like to use those really highly pigmented ones. So I really love those. When it comes to watercolor paper, I'm of two minds with it. This is just Canson XL watercolor paper. It's not expensive. It's maybe, I think it's like $15 for 30 sheets or something like that. So it's really, really cheap, but I find that for what I'm doing, these very kind of low, what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's not a lot of water going on to them. The images are very small. So for what I'm doing, they actually work perfectly. If I was doing something larger where I knew that I was going to have a lot more water being added to the surface, or I wanted more details or anything, I would probably go up to an Arches watercolor paper because they are, I think, like for me anyway, I love them. I think they're the best that money can buy in that case. But for these purposes, this watercolor paper is perfect. And the reason I started using this watercolor paper with this project was because that's all I had in my house in the pandemic, and or at the beginning of the pandemic, I should say. And I kind of always had them for doing demos in class as an inexpensive watercolor paper choice, but I really kind of backed up all my own decisions when I started using them for these pandemic portraits because I was like, you know what, this is great watercolor paper for these purposes. It's absolutely fine. Again, if I was going to add more water to it or more detail or whatever, I would maybe switch up to another. And when I do work for other people, I use something with a little more heft to it, but this is wonderful for these. No problem, Abby. Thank you for asking. Keep them coming, folks. I love adding blue around the eyes, just like a little subtle little bit of it. I find it's a nice break between all the warms with like the oranges and things like that, specifically around Kim's eyes, that the blues kind of just tone everything down. Like on this side, I'm feeling like there's far too much orange, so in some more blue goes. Like that. It's gotten real colorful. I'm not mad about it. And then when I'm working on the eyebrows too, I don't like necessarily to just like add in all the kind of like the depth of color that I want right in the beginning. I like to layer it a bit just so it doesn't feel too harsh. Lines on the face are always nice and fun. And you treat kind of like lines or wrinkles or things like that on the face kind of like freckles, where you don't try and just paint a line. If you paint a line in a nice dark color, automatically it is going to stand out far too much, and it's just going to look disconnected from the rest of your painting. Whereas if you come in and you lightly put in that line with a very washy tone of whatever you're using, and then build up over and over with different tones, it's going to read far better. I'm gonna go back over this forehead area with a little bit more color. So I'm gonna mix up some of this kind of sienna color. Kind of looks a little orangey when you get it on the palette there. And I'm gonna probably go in with a little ochre just to tone it down. I also find that in this particular line, the yellow ochre is a very highly pigmented color, and that's why it's good to always kind of test out your watercolors beforehand and know which colors are going to have more pigment in it than others. So I just added this kind of magenta color in here, and you can see how that turns into this very subdued kind of skin tone. It's very lovely. It's warm, but kind of balanced into the cool tone as well. And I just wanted to add a little bit more of that on top because I was feeling like the skin was getting a little too cool. So I wanted to warm it up with something that wasn't so intense. The other nice thing about this paper, this Canson XL, is that it's fantastic for picking up again. If you go too dark with your colors, you can bring it back up light again, which not all watercolor papers are good for. I'm going to start with this little purple shadow that happens underneath the glasses here. There's little areas that I'm always like excited for in portraits, and little under the glasses shadows are always one of them for some reason. I do a base color and then we'll come back in after. So I'm going to continue with this shade that I just mixed up and do it underneath, or paint it underneath the glasses here as kind of like a base color of what I want the cheeks to be. I'm using a lot of water to blend it out, and I'm just kind of going to cover this cheek area with it. Might move up a little bit onto the nose, and potentially actually a little bit under. This is a nice versatile tone for this particular face. Kim's cheeks are very nice and rosy, so that's going to be a fun thing to add on afterwards. I like to just sometimes just deposit that color right in there again, even if I know I'm going to put color over it after it, because I just like to know that it's there and to know that it's going to be influencing the colors that I put over top. There's another nice purple shadow. Sometimes you can put in like a little line like this, and then just with water on your brush, you can blend it out a bit, just so you can get an idea of where your shadows are going to be and not have it be so harsh. I'm going to mix up another round of that color that we made earlier. But this time, I'm going to use this brighter red. And you can see that it leaves it a lot brighter. And I want to use that kind of on the cheek. So you can see how the tone really changed with it. But I want to layer this up on this cheek color. I like that. I'm going to want it to be a little bit more purple later, but for now, that's good. There. And I'll probably head over to the other side and start to do just the same thing where I put that kind of base layer of color down. I find that the eyes take the longest to solidify in the beginning, and then after that, especially because you already have a bunch of your colors mixed up, that it tends to go quicker once you're finished the eyes. And then takes a bit again once it gets back into the hair. Ebbs and flows. So just got that nice kind of base tone in here. Want to be a little bit lighter in this area. Again, if you've just joined anytime recently, we're painting a pandemic portrait right now, and you can feel free to ask me any of your watercolor questions, pandemic portrait questions, life questions. I can try my best at those. Anything you like. Again, there's a nice redness to the chin, so I'm just going to put that in right now so I have it. Again, a nice pinkness to the cheeks here. I like when you can really start to see the portrait come alive on the page too. It's always satisfying. There's always a point before I put the eyelashes on too where I feel like, oh, is this gonna turn out? Might not. There. Maybe at this point, we'll start in with the nose a bit. So I'm gonna start with any very defining shadows or highlights that I see. So for example, right in the middle of the nose, there is a rather large purple shadow. So I'm gonna start with that one to really just anchor down everything so I know what's what. Same with around the outside here. And already that makes the nose come out so much more. And then I'm going to look around the outside, and I can see that there's a very dark shadow around the crease of the nose. So I'm going to get that in there. Like that. And it's pretty equally present on the other side. Going to tie into that shadow that happens there. I don't know if the microphone picks up that kind of like scrubby sound of the brush when it's just like semi-dry on the page. But it's a very nice sound. I like it. And Kim's got a bit of redness in the shadow on the nose up here, so I'm just going to make sure I get that in there nice. And when you're looking at the shadows on things like noses, especially so you don't make it look flat, you have to be very intentional with where you place them. I'm going to go in with the nostrils now. And I know that the nostrils aren't as dark as the pupils. The pupils are definitely the darkest thing in here, but they are still dark. I'm going to go in with a more purple than black tone. So I'm going to steal from the purple over here and maybe bring it in to this area where I've got all these dark colors, because I don't want it to be super dark, but I do need it to show that it's in shadow. So I'm just going to paint in these nostrils as I see them. Like that. It's probably pretty good. And the face really starts to come alive at that point. I'm just going to tidy up my shadow a bit on the bottom here because I want it to be a little bit lighter. There. I'm going to continue to go in with this kind of orangey color that we made all up in here. So now I'm just kind of filling in around the nostrils. I jump between my two sizes of brush a lot in this area. You really should use a brush that is the right size for the job that you're working on, but I find that in the nose there's so many different areas. Like I wouldn't want to really work on the nose at large with a small brush because I don't want to see all of my brush strokes the whole time. Get in a little darker. My paint's moved over a bit on me there. So again, like this paper, great for bringing things up when you mess up. You can just hop right back in and clean them up. Just a little bit of water on your brush. And I'm going to go into the underside of the nose too, like in this little lip between, or this spot between the lip and the nose, because I can't really get the bottom of the nose in there until that shadow is in there, because there's a nice highlight that happens in between the two. Some more of this orange color again. And you can tell that I make a color and then I just hop back into it a lot. And use other colors around it to kind of influence it. Seems like there's like a neat little shadow that happens like that. And if there's a part where you can't quite bring it back up again, that's why we have our gouache at the very end for doing those quick little fixes. Like for example, I'm going to brighten up that highlight under there a lot more with some gouache after. I just can't get it back up to that white, and I really do want that area to kind of glow. I'm going to add a layer of red onto the nostrils because I just feel like they dried a little dark. I want them to pop a bit. And again, the shadow has dried a little lighter than I wanted under the nose. So I'm gonna just pop that back in there. I'm going to go back into the cheeks again now. We got some nose put in. I realized I was going to share this on my feed and I completely forgot to. I bet I could do it. Bam. When it comes to these like bright red highlights in the cheeks, I find you have to be really intentional putting them in or it just looks a little wishy-washy. So just adding in the shape and just being intentional about your placement. The glasses I always leave until I'm feeling like, okay, I'm confident to start you, because the glasses I find are the trickiest part. I probably won't talk a lot when I'm working on them because I don't want to mess it up. They are such fine lines. There, just going in and putting in the little creases beside the mouth. Again, if you joined us recently, feel free to ask any questions about watercolor, portrait painting, my practice, pandemic portraits, anything like that. Anything at all. When I was doing the artist spotlight at the rooms, it was a neat idea. They actually had little laminated cards out. So if people wanted to ask questions but weren't quite sure what to ask, these little laminated cards, they could pick them up, and I had put some pre-made questions on there. So if they couldn't think of anything, that they had a little prompt. I thought that was a neat idea because I think sometimes it's intimidating when people are working on stuff to ask about what they're working on. I know that I can feel nervous about doing that sometimes. What made you start drawing knitted things? Ooh, I like that. Knitted things. So this is, I can make it a very long story and I can make it a short story. I'll try and find a little happy place in between them. So when I first moved to Newfoundland, this goes back about 5 years, I really didn't know anybody, or I'd never been to Newfoundland, and my partner moved for a job and I wasn't teaching at that point, so I wasn't really sure what I was doing. And so there was a lot of kind of uncertainty around everything. And I have a very good friend, Sarah Moulton, and she actually bought me a pair of knitted, like those really heavy knitted socks from the cash and carry out in Mount Moriah on her way to visit me one time. And she said when she got hit there that she knew that my feet had been really cold in the apartment that we were in because it was a nice wood stove, but we hadn't really quite mastered how to keep the house warm with it yet, because neither Andrew or I had experience with that. So she bought a nice pair of wool socks for me to keep my feet warm and just make everything feel more like home. And I thought that that was just such a sweet gesture. So I actually started drawing knitted things kind of based out of that, of things that made me feel nice and cozy. That was the first of the drawings. The first kind of experiment into knitted things for me was a purchase of a sweater from Nonia. It was in the not quite perfect section of like sale. And, oh, thanks for coming, Joyce. It was in the not quite perfect section. So I looked at it and I couldn't figure out what wasn't quite perfect about it. And there was 2 overlapping cables that didn't sit properly. And that made it 50% off, and I was fine with that. So I bought it and started wearing it. And I did actually, for the Eastern Edge, it's not called a show of smalls, that's what it is somewhere else, Fair and Square, for their fundraiser. I did a drawing of it, and it was on a wood panel, and my pencil wouldn't stay sharp, and it wasn't exactly what I really wanted. But I was so pleased with how cozy it looked after that, that's when I started looking at like the socks that I was given and other things that I was given to start painting them, or I should say drawing them as just little acts of knit. And I just kept going from that, drawing like little fragmented bits of knit. I find them very cozy and comforting. And it was a jump from doing portraiture for me, because before then I had been painting or drawing portraits. And the knitting was an interesting way for me to still look at detail, to still work in that kind of realm of realism, but not rely on painting people solely. I had this kind of, not issue, but like, I had this thing happen when I was in my master's where I was drawing all these portraits of people, and then all of a sudden I really started thinking, like, so what? Like, I'm drawing all these people, and so what? What am I actually saying? How am I getting across what I want to say with these? And I just felt like it wasn't doing it for me at the time. But then that stumped me into what I actually wanted to work on. I didn't know what I wanted to work on if I wasn't working on portraits. So knit was a nice opening into that. It's a great question, Kendall. I also like the repetitive act of knitting and reflecting it in the drawings. A lot of the drawings are just stitch after stitch after stitch after stitch, which to some people, I think, they would find that incredibly annoying. I personally really, really, really love it. Which boat are you in, Kendall? Like in the boat of like not knowing why you want to draw people? Yeah, it's difficult. Like, and I'm not saying not to, just because like I switched out of it, because obviously I've returned to it. I found that at the time, what was happening was I was painting these. So to get kind of more into it, I was painting these portraits of my family as an interpretation of what I thought home was at the time, which was the people within a place. And that's really, at that time, that was kind of all I knew to be what home could be. And it wasn't until I moved to Newfoundland that I started reevaluating that and questioning that and thinking that can't be really what it is for me. I'm not with all these people. How do I find a sense of home in a place where I've never been before with people that I don't know if family is nowhere near? So it was kind of a natural move for me to move away from portraiture at that time because it didn't make sense anymore for me to look at it. And now I'm revisiting people again and how it's not so much about people as they relate to home, but people in a way of finding comfort and familiarity in times where we are all a little uncomfortable with everything that's going on in the world. And especially like within the pandemic, finding ways to like find comfort and take solace in moments and with people. I find that like through the pandemic, people are something that I have missed the most. Like I'm very much a people person, as I'm sure anyone who really knows me would probably agree with that. I like to chat and I like to see people. So all of a sudden going from seeing tons of people every day and then to nothing was a very strange and difficult kind of transition for me. I hated it. It's nice that we can at least start to see people in person a little bit again, keeping our nice social distance. It's really about kind of looking in on your practice and thinking like, I'm drawing or I'm painting people, but why am I doing this? What am I kind of trying to say here? And are they the best way and best vehicle for talking about what I want to talk about, or is there something else? And I think that as artists, we're not staying stagnant and like committing to like one kind of imagery forever. I think it's going to ebb and flow and move. And that was something that I think I just had a hard time understanding, that it was going to move around and it didn't have to stay in one thing. I'm going to start putting, I think, yeah, I get that. Most of my portraits is a way for me to work through grief with losing, with losing family. Yeah, definitely. When I was working on, and I'm sorry for your loss. When I started working on some of my larger portraits in my master's, it was as a response to the passing of my Nana. I wasn't really working on anything to do with my family until my Nana passed away. And I had a nice good cry with my supervisor, and I kind of decided that if I was this upset about it, it was probably something that was going to be important in my practice to kind of explore. It's very weird being so like off to the side of this painting because the light changes when I look at it in different spots. I'm just going to let the lips dry here for a second. So I'm kind of like adding in some deeper hues now. I've got kind of like a main base layer of everything going on, so now I just need to start deepening everything where it needs to be deepened. A little bit of darkness underneath the lips, but not a whole lot. think we need some green in here. That's what we're missing. Sometimes if a painting is just looking a little too warm, I'm just like, nope, hit it with a layer of green. That's exactly what was going on here. I was looking at it and thinking, oh, this is so warm in all of these areas. I need to just hit it with something contrasting. I always have this nice big section of green on my palette for such purposes. It's already made up. I can just hop right in. Oh, doing great on time. Just going to lighten up this area here. Let that dry a bit. I'm probably going to put in, while everything's drying, I'm going to go in and put in some detail in the neck before I start putting in any more layers. Patience is obviously a virtue with watercolor, and sometimes you just need to sit and let things dry before continuing on. And this is one of those times. It's also important to think about the neck before you get too far gone. I find on the head, or all of these nice colors that you've been mixing up and using go away. And I like to tie in the color at least a little bit. So again, I'm just putting kind of like a base layer in here. Not a lot of highlights going on within the neck. Always looks kind of funny at that point when it's just an outline. There's a lot of green in the neck though. There's going to be some really dark shadows in here, but I don't want to quite get into those until the paint's more dry. So maybe I'll hop around into another spot. I find that watercolor is a lot of hopping around between places and making sure that you, like again, are patient and allow things the time it takes for them to dry. I think at this point, I want to put the glasses in. We're going to do it. So Kim's glasses they look black, but I think that they're actually more of a brownie black. So I want to make sure that I am portraying that properly. I like to mix up a lot of the glasses color in advance because I like to just have it ready to go. I don't want to keep coming back to it and making up new stuff. I just like to, honestly, I like to do the glasses and get them over and done with and move on to the next spot. They are higher stress than everything else for me. Okay, we're going in. Wish me luck. I like to start with the middle. Makes a big difference anyway. If you can get the glasses in with one kind of big swoopy motion, that's usually the best way so you don't see a bunch of brush marks after. But even still, like I mixed up all that paint and I already feel like it's too watered down and I need to mix a little bit more. Because I'm picky like that. So this is going to be a good lesson. My brush, because I'm sitting not in front of it, has gotten a little heavy in one spot. So we're going to have an impromptu how to fix a spot when it got too big. But I'm not gonna worry about it yet. I'm gonna just go on and finish the rest of the glasses first. Maybe that's good. And we can all learn together how to fix dark spots. Good boy. Next time you're working on a watercolor, try sitting off to the side from it. It's very weird. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. We are getting some glasses on here. It's also funny because in this photo, Kim's glasses are not sitting straight, which really threw me off when I was drawing them in. So that's interesting to remember too. This part isn't quite as dark, so we're not going to paint it as dark. Okay. So I haven't figured out if I went too big on the inside or the outside yet, but my gut's telling me it's on the inside. So that's where we're going to do it. So I just cleaned off my brush, and I'm going to keep cleaning it off and making it semi-dry, and I'm just going to kind of like rub it back and forth on the area that got too wide, just right on the edge. And it's not going to be clean, and it's not going to be pretty in the beginning, but we will make it that way. Everyone thinks that once the watercolor goes down, then that's it, you're done. But it's a little more forgiving than that. Same with this area up here. This area got a little ahead of me too. Okay, and then the key thing is letting it dry. And you'll notice that things start to feel maybe too light once you've gone in with something so dark like the glasses. You'll just have to kind of renegotiate your values a little bit at this point. But first I'm going to start with the mouth. Mix up kind of a more purpley hue with the darks that I have for that line in the middle of the mouth. I'm going to add that in first. Reason being, I like to kind of anchor it, and I find you can always go back and fix it. You don't have to commit to this line because you're probably going to change it again. Okay, so I'm just gonna let that dry for a second. And maybe while that's drying, I'll go down and work in the neck a bit. Just gonna get some of these nice deep shadows that exist down here. And again, I like to figure these out kind of in advance because I don't want my values to be all mismatched. Like I'm definitely going to even make these shadows darker than I have them right now. This is a nice kind of start, but they're not dark enough yet. But again, if you were to just put that dark color in right away, it's going to feel like far too much. Like it's scary. It's a softer shadow as it travels down. Make sure that we have that in there. There. And then also that nice soft shadow kind of comes across here. Sometimes I like leaving these nice hard lines that just kind of happen, depending on where they are. I do find that with the Winsor & Newtons, the red, sometimes when you layer it, because it's so pigmented, it just hangs out there, not in my favorite way, and you have to manipulate it quite a bit. Okay, I'm gonna go back into the lips now. I'm gonna pull from this red down here where I have kind of like a bright red, like an orangey red, a red, and like a cadmium red, and then I have a bit of the crimson, and I just kind of pull from them across there. I'm going to start to add the top lip first. And again, same idea where I'm not going to just go in and make it super dark right away. I'm going to layer it up. This is a good way kind of like negotiating your palette while you're working on it, is to put out some colors together, like having that scale of red, and then you can just pick between them while you're working on them. I don't know if that's what you're supposed to do, but that's what I do, and it works okay for me. There. And you don't want to go too crazy. Again, with your shadows. Just let them get built in. So I'm going to leave that to dry again for a second, even though there's more I want to do, but I don't want to disrupt that. So we'll leave it. I'm going to try and get a little bit more depth into this area of shadow here. Better. Now that I have this dark area up there too, I feel like I'm going to add a little bit of it up here because I think that I want that same kind of shadow to tie in, even though it's not found in that area in my painting. I just want it to tie in a bit more, so I'm just going to force it in there. I'll just have to do. And again, I'm just continuing to layer these shadows. Tone down that one a bit because it got a little orange. Good. And now I'm actually going to come up with my brush and try and fix up this area a little bit. Now that's dry. Make it not as muddy. I also noticed that I'm missing a rather strong highlight right here. So I'm just going to go in with my brush, clean, semi-wet, and just erase it out a bit. That's what good watercolor paper and good paints will give you, erasability. Now I'll go back down to my lips. I don't go into too much detail in the lip. I just try and get the color and overall shape right. I can tell that this highlight's a little on the bright side right now, so I'm going to tone that down. And even tone this down a little bit too. If you've joined us recently, we're working on a pandemic portrait in watercolor, and you can feel free to ask me any questions pertaining to pandemic portraits or art or my practice or anything of the sort. I only had to speak for an hour by myself last time. This time I'm speaking for 3 hours by myself. I'm running out of my self-content. I'm just going and making sure that all of these shadows around the eyes are dark enough right now. Here. Get around the nose. I notice that there's a bit of a line there. There's a couple, I know I said I don't do a lot of detail in the lips, but there was just a couple little like predominant lines and areas in shadow that I wanted to add in. Not a lot of them, but enough that it makes a difference when you see them. So I'm just putting those in now. And then I can tell that over here, it just came down a little bit low, so I'm going to erase it. I find when you're working on these small little paintings, any spot that is far too dark or far too light or is just a little bit too big, it makes a really big difference in the outcome on the likeness. And that's why I kept saying like intentionality when you're working on these is so important. Making sure that your brush strokes are exactly where you want them and what you want them to be doing. Oh, I was going to sit here and I was going to ask Whitney what a nice next topic would be. But Whitney's gone. What should I talk about, everybody? Give me a topic. I can probably talk about anything, just I need a prompt. It's funny because there's a delay too, where I wait for things to come in with the live. Just coming back into the neck. Again, layering up those shadows. Favorite artist? Oh, you asked the big questions, Kendall. That's like a fantastic question. I feel like it changes all the time. Whoa. Trying to think who my favorite artist like right now is. I don't know why this is such a difficult question, but it's always been a really tricky question for me about like favorite artists, because for a very long time, my favorite artist was Chuck Close. He was just like absolutely like goals almost. But he's not quite anymore. And I feel like it's more like I like certain artworks than artists altogether. Like I really like Susie McMurray does these like really beautiful hairnet drawings that I adore. I really like Marlene Kreitz, some Newfoundland artist. Sorry, I went all radio silent. I'm looking at these two red patches on Kim's face, and like I want them more to look like what's happening in the chin more than what they are here. And I think that one of them is just like far too dark to be able to do that anymore. I got distracted. Let me just clean this up. I really like Alex Bjork's paintings of windows. They are glorious. That's looking a bit better. Not quite there yet. Oh, I see what's wrong. This extended far too much down. That's already better. Nailed it. Now I'm going to let that area dry a little bit before I get into it. I need a deeper purple. I think that if I had to say like my absolute favorite artist right now, so I've been putting thought into this the whole time while I've been negotiating these things. I think Vija Clemens is one of my favorite artists of all times. I adore her drawings and paintings of water. I got to go see her work in person at the AGO a couple summers ago, and I could have stayed in that exhibit for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. It was absolutely mind-blowing. I think it's the first time in a long time that I've bought a catalog at a large gallery for an artist too. Mary Pratt's up there as well with favorite artists. Her work is absolutely astounding. I feel like that was the longest it's ever taken me to answer a question. Kendall, who's your favorite artist? Mary Pratt is your all-time favorite. I love that. Love that for you. She's just incredible. Have you seen Barbara Pratt's paintings of cakes? Because they are absolutely glorious. I'm obsessed with them. They're so lush looking. And then there's this bakery on Instagram that I follow, and they keep posting pictures of cakes, and I keep playing the game of, is it a Barbara Pratt or is it a whatever that cake place is, when it pops up on my feed. I'll send it to you next time. It's a fun game. I'm just, again, going over on some shadows and just bringing a little more depth into them. I should say, too, that if any point you want to look at the source image that I'm using, that you can always email or message Rotary Arts, and Whitney can send it along to you so that you can see what we're working on, who we're working on, and what I'm referring to when I talk about certain things. Okay. So Kim's chin area is kind of, it's difficult because there's not a whole lot of differentiation between the chin and the neck, the way that this photo's lit. It's almost like there's a highlight immediately under her chin rather than a shadow. That's why it's so important to look, because you'd probably just assume that this would be a hard shadow, but it is not. I want to add a little more purple above the top lip here. I'm going to add a little bit more under in the neck. Sometimes I find that I will paint a certain area and it's looking really good, and then I don't realize that it needs a lot more shadow. I get just kind of caught up in the fact that, like, oh, this is looking good. Sometimes it's important to go back and think about your value scale and add a little bit more in there. I think at this point, while things are drying again, I think that I'm going to start going in and getting the shirt in. Now you're probably thinking, why the shirt? Why not the hair? I like to get the shirt done first because then it sits underneath the hair. I like to do things that are further away first and closer up after. So I'm just going to zoom in on this, or I guess zoom out. So Kim's wearing a white shirt with black little, like, not polka dots, but kind of like lines. So I'm going to start by mixing just a very generic-y looking brown color and make it very washy. And I'm going to start by painting in the areas of shadow on this shirt. Also, this photo cuts off Kim's shirt really awkwardly on the bottom, and so I'm making up a bit of the bottom of it, just in case you are following along and saying, where's she getting all this information? I'm making it up. I just wanted to extend it just so it looks a little more natural. So as you can see, I've just kind of got this dark little area here, and then while it's still wet, I'm going to go into the areas that I want really dark and just add just wet on wet a bit of a darker hue, and then I'll let that dry and just kind of see what that does, and I'll touch it up from there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Again, just kind of bringing it down, making it up as we go along a little bit. And maybe this one a bit. Like that. And we'll add in that depth underneath here. Because it gets kind of boring if you just make it too perfect. There, and I'm going to wait for that to dry for a second before I get the rest of the collar on, because I don't want to disrupt the nice hard lines that I just made there. I'd rather add to them. But what I will do actually is put in a little more dark up here, because that's going to be right under the hair. Same with on this side, right under the hair. Nice. That tucks in a bit though. I think that clothing has become one of my favorite parts in this. I really like painting the clothes. And I thought that was going to be kind of like one of the parts at the end where I was going to want to rush through it. But I really like them now. So when people send me ones that have really interesting shirts, I get excited. For anyone who's joined us, we are working on painting a pandemic portrait of Kim Greeley, Newfoundland painter and printmaker. And you can feel free to ask me questions about pandemic portraits, about painting, drawing, anything. So on the collars, I'm gonna let it mostly be pretty white, but I'm just running it right to the edges. And then I'm going to add some shadow, again, right where the hair is going to be meeting the shirt and covering it. Jeepers, I've got a hair again. There we go. Because I paint near my cats. The cat hair gets in things. It's okay though. There, I'm gonna let that dry for a sec while I go in with my smaller brush and just add in some details where I want it to be nice and heavily dark, like under here and here. Just makes it pop out a bit. I'm not worried about it necessarily reading exactly like the shirt. You may be thinking it looks pretty dark for a white shirt, but as soon as I start adding on the details, I think it's really gonna pop out at us. Go in and just really make that outline where the shirt tucks in here a little darker, especially while my paint is still semi-dry, so it's a little softer. It's a good, nice, dark shadow, like that. And I might tuck it up a little bit and just force it under the chin, just a bit. There's also this thing about translation between a drawing and a painting. Oh, sorry, a painting and a photo. And sometimes there's certain things that you just need to force a little bit or do differently for it to translate correctly. And I find that shirts have that happen a lot. I'm going to have some buttons here, so I'm just going to paint the shadows for the buttons. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail with them because I find it looks a little weird. If they stand out too much, sometimes they pop up too much off the page. reinforce that just a little bit more around the collar. Nice. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I can see that I really need a bit more right here. There. Okay, so we'll let that dry a second. Maybe while it's drying, we'll attempt another layer of the pink on the cheeks. See how that goes. I just want that nice rosiness. The most successful time that I've done the nice rosiness I think so far is on the one that I did of Kelsey Street. She got a sunburn, and that was the premise of sending the photo to me. And I was pleased with how that one turned out. That's a bit better. I just like pink in portraits anyway. A little bit more down there. Into the neck. That's nice. All right, let's get in with this pattern. So I'm gonna, again, premix. I don't want it to look super black. I'm gonna use Payne's Gray. I'm gonna use the raw umber. And I'm just going to start with the pattern. When I start with the ones further away, I'm going to water down my paint a little bit because I don't want it to be the strongest thing that I'm seeing. And the pattern on this shirt is polka dots, but kind of done in lines. So I'm just going to do that and try and kind of go with the fabric. Kind of goes from the side on the back, and then it changes direction on the front. Other side on here, and again, making sure that you're using the correct colors on each side so you don't have that discrepancy. Things looking too dark or too light. Remember that your paints are going to dry a bit lighter too when they dry. Now I'm going to go in with the darker stuff and change direction. And I'm not being perfect with this. I don't really want to be perfect with this. If I was being perfect, there would be far more of these little spots. But I'm just trying to kind of follow the pattern enough that I understand it, but not that it looks perfect. Because I think in some ways too, you have to let the watercolors be watercolors. I think that my pattern is a lot closer than it actually is in it, but that's okay. I also think that it's going to give it a nice, texture. I know it doesn't apply to this, but every time I do something and then I look up at the screen, the last comment that was left was Kendall's very enthusiastic yes. So I feel like everything that I'm saying is just yeah, that's awesome. It's very affirming. This is where it gets kind of interesting because I want it to still read like there are little folds in the fabric. So I'm just making some of them covered by others. So it's not as uniform. Would have made a great cheerleader. You would have, Kendall. There wasn't even a cheerleader program when I was in high school. Not that I'm saying that I'm missing out on doing it or anything, but we didn't have one. I don't think our school is big enough. It's funny because I went to the biggest high school in the area, but it was a very small town, but it was just all the tiny little towns fed into the same big high school. There, and then I want to disrupt the pattern on this thing because I want it to not read exact same as the shirt, and then I want to follow the pattern sideways on the collar. Again, so it just travels the other way. Nice. Okay. So we got tons of little dots in there. That's looking good. I'm going to let that dry because I want to go over, now that I have those dark values in there, I want to go over the really dark values and put in some more shadows, but I don't want to disrupt the paint as it is right now. So I'm just going to wait a second before I hop back in there. And in the time being, I'm going to just do a little bit more on the glasses up here. I realize they're a little thin on the inside. That's better. And I'm just going to make the inside of the nostril a little darker right there. Okay. And then again, while we're waiting, I'm actually going to whip out some gouache. I like using gouache just to get little areas of highlight. Now, in this portrait of Kim, there's not a whole lot, but we might employ it a bit in the hair. You just want to be careful that you're not mixing your gouache into the rest of your paints in all your other areas, or it's going to just be in there all the time. It doesn't activate with, or reactivate, I should say, with water in the same way. So you don't want to get it all in your paints and then have it not kind of mix in with it well. So I just wanted to add the gouache in for a couple spots. One is this highlight on the nose that kind of got lost when I was using the purple. And I want to bring it back in, which I'm going to cover up again actually, as backwards as that sounds. I just want to make it a little thinner. But for now, just want it there so I can see it. And then I wanted to just emphasize this highlight a little bit more. And I'm using it a little watered down so it's not at like its full kind of potency. I don't want it to be. There is a slight highlight in the eye, and I want to include that, so I'm putting that in. And I think other than that, we're pretty good to not add too much. I might add just like a slight smidgen in the lip right there. These are all tiny little things that I don't think should be necessarily noticeable. I think that they should blend into it really well, but they read well once they're actually there. And I'm just going to add in a little bit more of a shadow there, under there. And I want to reestablish under the nose. There. Nice. Okay, so now that that's in there, we've had a moment for it to dry down here, so I'm going to add in a little bit more shadow. I don't want to disturb what I've already done though, so I'm just going to go one stroke over top. As soon as you start going back and forth, that's when you're going to disturb what you've already done underneath. We don't want that. So as you can see, I'm just doing quick little strokes that aren't going to disrupt the pattern once over. Okay. Maybe a little bit more in the collar. Nice. Okay, so at this point now, I'm going to start looking at the hair. Hair takes a little bit longer because it takes a little pre-planning, kind of like the dedication that we give to painting the eyes. So to start, I like to start around the face and filling in the darkest areas that I'm going to be looking at. So if I'm looking at the darkest areas, I want to go ahead and mix a nice dark shade, and you guessed it, I'm going to be using Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. I just like that combo. It is a very, it creates a very rich brown. If I wanted it to be not as rich, I would use my raw umber, but I want it to be rich. So I'm just going to start looking for the areas that have the most shadow to them around the face. So I like doing this too because all of a sudden it kind of like starts to frame your piece. And I'm gonna do any particular curls that really stand out. Now, you wanna really be careful when you're painting around the head because you're creating the jaw and really framing the jaw. So I take my time on this step. I don't wanna rush it because it is a lot harder if you go over what you've been doing to go back and fix it up at this point. You've already mixed all your beautiful tones. You don't want to go over and do them again. Or maybe you do. I'm not here to judge, but all I know is that I don't really want to go over it all again. We've been there, done that. Okay. Any area that I'm filling in dark, I'm making sure that I fill in with a bit of texture too. There's not too many areas that sit very dark. Now, beside the glasses is really dark, so I'm actually going to mix up, oopsies, a little bit more. Just so I know that the pigment doesn't have a lot of water in it and it's going to appear very, very dark. Like that. And over there. Again, painting with some texture, just making some brush marks where the super dark spots are, like that. And you may find that you want to go back in on some areas and darken them back up. Because again, it's going to dry a little later than you first intended. So then we kind of have the beginnings of the curls in there. At that point, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to mix kind of like a mid-tone to what we were just using. So I'm going to use some burnt and raw umber in here to kind of create that mid-tone color. And I'm going to, again, because Kim has such curly hair, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start using texture to fill it in. Some nice curly cues. Curls aren't about like doing little coily shapes. It's more about like, picture that you're painting ribbon. That's probably a better analogy, that you have a piece of ribbon that's going back and forth. That will give you a better curl. These face framing pieces, I'm gonna have to go in and get some more dark on there. And again, being intentional about your shapes and intentional about your brush strokes. I'm using the larger of the two brushes right now too. If there's a bright highlight somewhere, don't go out of your way to paint it. If you can leave it, then that's probably going to be better. And that curl protrudes onto the face a little. This is all creating like a base right now. And I like to keep it a little bit thinner than what I think I'm going to need to do, because you can always use your brush and create more curls, but it's hard to take white and make everything more narrow after. Use some dark here, just to give it that lift. Get in there. Okay. So we've got kind of like our curl structure. I'm going to just rudely put my face in front so I can see that my jaw is all good. A little bit wide from sitting on the side. That's okay, we can fill that in. I won't sit with my head in front the whole time, I promise. Just want to tidy it up. I need to be in front for that. Okay, I'm back. There. So I've narrowed up the face quite a bit because I found that since I'm on the side, my perspective is a little bit off. So it's good to always kind of check your work from a little further away. So now I'm going to go in with my brush and I'm going to start adding, my smaller brush, and I'm going to start adding in that curl texture. So I'm going to start with using a darker tone. And I'm just kind of making little C's and like squiggly lines, I guess. Starting with curls that are in behind. With the hair, you don't need to make it perfect, nor in these pandemic portraits would I want to make it perfect. Wouldn't be able to fall kind of in line of doing them in under 3 hours. I just want to give that suggestion that it's nice and big and curly. If it's looking dark at this point, that's okay because we're going to go over and put in some highlights with the gouache anyway. That's another part of the pandemic portraits. When I started them, I told myself that I was only ever going to give myself 3 hours. 1 hour for drawing it and 2 hours for painting it, or half an hour for drawing it and 2.5 hours for painting it, because I didn't want it to turn into this exercise that took me forever. I wanted to give myself a time limit and kind of like get in and get done and have that be an accomplishment for the day. And that was tricky at first, but like how you saw last week, that's how I came up with that kind of quick structure for drawing the face. That was very beneficial for that. And it forces me to not be as precious, which is something that I struggle with a lot. I always want to make everything so perfect, and I don't think that's the point of these. I think the point is to just kind of convey that essence and that pandemic state, and I don't think any of our pandemic states are perfect. For anyone who just joined, we're working on a pandemic portrait of Kim Greeley, and you can feel free to ask any questions about pandemic portraits or my practice. My name is Michelle MacKinnon, in case that's not there. Anything you'd like. These little curly Q hairs are probably my favorite out of anything to do on portraits, like the ones that just stick out from the face. They are like icing on the cake to paint, especially when it's curly hair and you can kind of just like make them go in any which way you want to. And if you're finding that it looks dark, the gouache is going to come in very soon and just brighten them back up. So you can see that I keep going on the outside of the hair. It's because I intentionally wanted to make it a little too thin, so I can just let these little fine hairs come on the outside. Hey, Kim. Here to see your portrait. Yay! Kim, you picked a wonderful shirt for this portrait. It was very fun to paint. And now we get to paint a mountain of curls, and that is even more fun. Curly hair's the best for it. Going in with a little bit of a darker tone in here for these bottom ones. Again, just lots of little C's and squiggles. Thank you, Kim. I'm glad you like it. That's like a whole other layer of the pandemic portraits, is like people seeing them afterwards is always a little nerve-wracking, especially because, I mean, you're not showing just anybody. Like I'm specifically painting artists, and that is nerve-wracking sometimes. Kim, yours got this added layer of bonus that I've been talking about, of difficulty, where I have to sit off to the side so that people at home can see what I'm doing. And because of that, I've had to keep like moving over and taking peeks. This is the best part of the whole process, is doing these little tiny hairs that sit in front. Look at those. They're so satisfying. Okay, now I'm gonna mix a little bit of gouache into my paint, but I'm gonna do it over on this side because I don't want all of the gouache to kind of get into my watercolors and start making them opaque. So I don't want it to be bright at all. I just want it to be a bit darker because I want to add in some yellowy kind of highlights. There. So the gouache is good because gouache makes things just like opaque. So you can add in little details on top and really define those curls. Oh, that's so sweet, Kim. Your daughter said that she's going to be famous. That's so sweet. Hello, Kim's daughter. There. I really love the honesty of kids looking at these portraits. There was one who looked at it in the rooms and said, all these people look tired. It's like, aren't we all? Speak the truth. Sometimes I find I go overboard on these fun little hairs on top because I just love them so much. They're so fun and satisfying to paint, and they just add more depth to it all of a sudden. Like there's a layer that brings things forward, not just everything being backwards. And you can use them to like define the glasses a little bit strategically, even if there's not hairs there. And you can break up the dark space as well. We're definitely closing in on this portrait a little earlier. Does anyone have any other, like, even general watercolor questions that I could talk about while I'm finishing up the last little bit of the hair, or anything else along those lines? Just adding in like a lighter layer now of the color that I just did. I'm mixing some more white gouache into it just to get those really bright highlights. There's a bunch of little stray hairs around here too that kind of like flew in. Maybe I'm adding a lot of them, but that's okay. I enjoy it. And I know that there were a few people who said that they were following along with these paintings while we're doing them. So please, like tag me in them or something. Like if you post them on Instagram, or just like send them to me because I want to see. Be very exciting. Nice. And now I'm going to go in with just a few more dark ones, I think, at the bottom. Make sure you get your brush like fully cleaned. How long have I been playing with watercolors? That's a good question. Not long. I use them like on and off. I answered a question similar to this at the beginning where I said that I used them on and off when I was in my undergrad, but I kept having instructors tell me, oh, you can't use watercolor for finished paintings because you should be using acrylic or oil or whatever. So I didn't delve into them too hard. And then I always just kind of played with them as like when I was mapping out paintings or mapping out drawings and things like that, and I never really used them for actual paintings up until the pandemic portraits, really. I think that I have a good understanding of them because I was using them for mapping things out. So I was always playing with them, but I just never really got into them hard until these. But I also found that I used acrylics like I was using watercolors sometimes. And I was very glazy with them. So I think in a way that really influenced my use of watercolors too. So I was using other mediums like it. There, just want a little more shadow on the chin there. I'm really loving this chin section. Sometimes there's the most mundane parts of the painting that I end up falling in love with, and on this one it's definitely the chin. Right now I'm just going in and I am kind of reevaluating the areas of shadow. So over here there is a strong shadow that happens down the side of the face, but because I trimmed down the face a little bit, I lost that shadow that I had already made. So now I'm going back in and adding it in again. It's important to have. Same with down here on the neck, that kind of got lost in the shuffle. So now putting it back in, and there is a little shadow that kind of happens right there where if you were here on the first day, we were talking about that kind of connection between the chin and the jaw, and how it appears unconnected here and connected over here. We were very, very analytical of face shape when we were talking about you before, Kim. Fully understand how your face works. It's a weird thing to say to somebody. Again, I'm just going to pop my head over here so I can take a look at the shape. I'm going to add a little bit more shadow in around the eyes right now because I'm noticing that it got a little light. So we're just going to hop back in there. I'm using kind of like a burnt sienna, this magenta. I think this color is specifically called like Purple Lake or something. I end up using it a lot. You'll notice too when I've been working on these, I think that I use the number 0 brush fair majority of the time. I like having that control from it. And these aren't like the most expensive brushes. They're not cheap, but they're not the most expensive. They're Princeton. These ones started out as my partners, and I've commandeered them since. And then I went to put in an order to replace them. I'm not sure that they make them anymore. Not exactly the same. They still make Princeton watercolor brushes, but I'm not sure that they make these same ones anymore. A little bit more of this purpley tone on the chin side here. Got a little highlighted when we weren't looking. There we go. I like this bright highlight here. I want to preserve that one. Nice. A little more purple in here. And I kind of lost the shadow that happens on the side of the face here too. it's important. Some of the shadows on the side of the face get really important when you're looking at it in terms of the jaw shape. So it's important to reevaluate those. I always have to shift gears when I come on to doing things like this, because in my classes I'm like, everybody, you have to talk, you have to participate, that's important. And then I realize that no one has an obligation to do that on this. Just filling in, again, more of the shadows now underneath where the hair sits on the top of the head. And I'm not super pleased with how these ones turned out, so I'm gonna go in and just like paint over them a bit, like that, making sure that that one kind of gets connected. That's better. They were just protruding a little bit too far. I'm going to go back into this shadow area here. Get it in good. I'm not super happy with something going on here. It's almost like there's another shadow in there that I'm missing at the moment. Let's try and add that in. I swear that every time that I get to the end of these portraits, I could sit here for hours just in the final stages of working on them and just keep going that way. But these have actually been a really good exercise in making myself stop. Because it's hard when you know that you can always just keep working on it and it could get better. But at one point, either you're going to mess it up, or you just need to stop because it's time to stop. What colors of gouache have you used? I have actually only used white, this really old Turner gouache. That's the only color that I've used the entire time when it comes to gouache. I've tinted the gouache a little bit with the watercolors in areas like here. I've put a little bit of yellow ochre into it, but not a lot. I don't like to use a lot of gouache. I like to rely more on the watercolors to kind of shine through. Mostly because I like to later reactivate things. And with gouache, you're kind of stuck on it being solid and being there afterwards. So I'm just adding a little bit more of this orangey red to the cheeks now, because I've figured out that that's kind of what it's missing, is that nice orangey red tone in some spots. Same with the chin. I feel like I have a mixed relationship with gouache. When I learned it when I was in high school, I absolutely hated it because the teacher who was teaching it just wanted to use it in terms of for design. So using it with the correct amount of water that it just turns like this nice opaque matteness, which is awesome. And it's really cool that it can do that, but I just was not feeling it when I was working with it. And I didn't touch it again for the longest time until I realized that I could use it alongside watercolor. And now I like it a lot more. But to be honest, I only own white. I don't own any other gouache tone. I don't think I've ever, I've barely used my white watercolor. I don't like it really. I think it makes everything look like a pastel version of itself. So I just avoid using it. And I would rather rely on protecting the white on my paper than go in with white watercolor or white gouache for that matter. I just use it for areas where it's fallen a little bit short, the color that is, like the white of the page, and I need to get a little further in and highlight it. Very watered down version of this tone. Just want to I like going over at the end with kind of like not a stipple, but kind of a texture, just to make it feel more like skin and to make it feel less smooth. I want to add a little more pink to the forehead, but I want it to dry before I go in with it. It's exciting though, she's almost done. There was this purple hue that I put down right here a while ago. It's never fully really come off the page. It was very, like that color is just very staining. And more green too. I was talking earlier about how much I love putting green into things. Especially around the eyes to balance out the red. And I find that on portraits where there's glasses, I don't know, I just like green and where the glasses go. And I don't think that it's super important to have your colors perfectly line up. I think depositing little bits of other colors make it a little more rounded and more full. I almost want to put a little green in the nose. But I'm looking at it. Yeah. I find green is one of those little finishing touch colors for me too, where I go back into the portrait after and add it in. I never want to use too much of it. I don't want to get a jaundicey situation going on. Because that's yellow though. I do need to just correct a little bit on the jaw. Make it a little more straight. Yeah. Ooh, 1 second, everybody. I need to get in front of this. I find that you really have to reevaluate your jaw once you've gone in with the hair around it, just to make sure that it's still the same shape that you intended it to be. Get a few more little curlies in some spot where I want them to be added. Also, part of the reason that I didn't use gouache was because when the pandemic first kind of got a little large, I was just using what was already in my house. I didn't want to go to the store to get anything if I didn't have to, nor did I think that to be a responsible decision. So I just used whatever was in the house. And at the time I didn't have any, well, I didn't think I had any gouache in my house. And then maybe like on portrait number, I'm going to say like 20, I noticed that I had gouache in the bottom of a box. And that was a really exciting find. And again, the only color that I had in that box was white, but it just made it so I'm like, oh, I don't need to be as incredibly careful now around the areas where I need to stay white. Because before I'd accidentally cover them and then it was just that was game over. It'd never get back to perfect white again. So that was a good find. I want to add some of this really nice dark color down into the shirt a little bit, just so it gets tied in. That looks better. Again, for anybody new to the feed, we're just finishing up a pandemic portrait right now, but please feel free to ask any questions that you may have about it, about the process, about watercolors. Yeah, that just like made the shirt stand out a little bit more, which is nice. Clean up this little area down here too. The glasses got away from me a little bit earlier. Let that dry before I fix the color on it, because I think it needs to be a little bit more of a pinky white. And again, that's something that I can use that little bit of gouache in to cover that up with a little bit of a pinky white color. Because then we'll just lift it up a bit. That's the only part on my palette that I really do have to go back and clean, is the one little square that I use gouache on, because it's starting to get a little too messy and everything is turning out a little bit gray on it. Just find it eventually gets like that. And the reason that I don't go in and use gouache everywhere is that I do find it dries with a very, very different finish. There's like a semi-opaqueness to it, and I like the watercolor to just have its kind of like glow from the watercolors themselves and not have that kind of odd coloring to it. But I'm also picky like that. So that could be just me. It's too bad this isn't like a real job of just sitting here all day, every day, painting paintings and talking to people who may or may not be listening. This would be great. I understand why Bob Ross got into his field. There were a lot of Bob Ross Halloween costumes that I saw this year. I don't know about anybody else. A whole bunch. I feel like Bob Ross got real cool again. Or he never stopped being cool, but I feel like he's had a nice resurgence in popularity. Right now I'm just kind of like looking at the piece and reevaluating. There's like this one really bright highlight by the eye right now, and I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I think I've just been trying to figure out what color to fill it in with, and I think it's gonna be red. Because because I need it to not be as bright. That's all I really know. It can't just sit there as white. But I was having a hard time knowing which color I wanted. It's too red now, though. That's better. Good. Same with this kind of highlight going on in here. It's just slightly too bright. Tone it down a little bit. And the color going on over here. I feel like this is all just kind of reevaluating time. It's better. I want to add a little bit more lightness in the hair right here too. Even just that's good. A little lighter. Ooh, it's a shadow that we've missed out on. This one right behind the glasses. That's an important one. This is why there's all that reevaluating time at the end. Sometimes you just don't see things the first go around. See how that just brings the eyes closer together? Without that, I think that would have been a little weird. That's good. Good find. And then I'm just glazing over top now. Making sure we have the right tones and shadows. I'm just kind of going around to each area on the face and comparing it to the photo right now, just to make sure that there isn't anywhere that is too light or too dark. And also kind of looking at my shadow shapes, my highlight shapes, and making sure there aren't areas that protrude more or are bigger or smaller than they should be. Add just a little more coolness to the forehead. Got a little warm in the beginning stages, so that purple will help tune it down a little bit. There's this really pretty purple that I made on my palette of like a cyan and that crimson color. And I was hoping that it would get some play on this, but it's too bright. It was kind of like a Whoopsies accidental color that I made. That was very nice. So the nice thing about watercolor anyway is it'll just sit there and it's ready for the next one. And if there's a spot where I can add it in that looks right, then I will. Thinking we're at that point in time when we're basically, there's not much more to be done on it. If you have any last questions to get out before we finish up, I would use this opportunity to do so. You can, if you don't, you can follow me on my Instagram, which is Michelle Lee MacKinnon, and see other pandemic portraits. And you can see new ones that go up. I'm hoping to over the holidays, do some more, and just once teaching's calmed down a little bit, because it's busy right now. Why is it important for you to paint these artists? That's a great question. For me, what it kind of started out as was I was painting people that I felt like comfortable asking if I could paint them. That was kind of a beginning factor of this. And they just happened to be other artists working in Newfoundland at the time. And then as the project continued to go, I was just very curious about how other artists were feeling about these ideas surrounding productivity and essentially just like closeness with other people and communicating with other people throughout the pandemic. And so it just kind of became a way for me to, I guess, connect with other artists in Newfoundland in a time when connecting with people is a little difficult. And I am just genuinely very interested in their ideas of what was significant to them during this time. Like, as an artist, I'm interested in what other artists were thinking as well. So it kind of, it started as me just having people that I felt comfortable reaching out to, and then it expanded into kind of just a common theme. Like, I didn't really realize that it was an emerging theme in it until I spoke with Mira Egan about it for a bit, and we were talking, and she said, you know, all of these people are like artists in Newfoundland. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess they are. And I just kind of kept going on that common theme for the time, and I just enjoyed it. Now it just feels like a lovely ongoing project. I don't know if it'll expand into other people, or, I mean, it doesn't need to right now. There are still so many artists and arts people in Newfoundland that I haven't painted, obviously. Like, I've only dipped my toe in the pool. So it can easily be a project that keeps going on for a bit, and I think that that's why it's exciting too. I also, I would love to find a platform to be able to share these, but then also share artist practice with them as well. Just even kind of just really show people artists in Newfoundland. I like it a lot. Okay, I think on that note, I don't know if, oh, yep, okay, Whitney's behind me. On that note, I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone who tuned in and for last time and this time on Painting a Pandemic Portrait. It was wonderful to be here and wonderful to share this with you. Like I said, if you want to keep following Pandemic Portraits, you can follow me at Michelle Lee MacKinnon on Instagram. Or my website is michellemackinnon.ca. I'm hoping to get some more done. And thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.